Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media on this Friday, March 11th, 2022. And if you would like additional weather information, you can always go online to weather.gov. If you throw in /Alaska, it will dial in specifically on Alaska, but otherwise the interface shows up a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left, and you click on anywhere in that map and it'll bring up the location. It allows you for point-and-click forecast, watches, warnings and advisories, and much more information. It allows you to keep tabs on what the weather is like in other parts of the country that may be affecting family or friends. And looking on today's this afternoon's map, there are winter storm warnings that extend all the way from northern Alabama up through eastern Tennessee, Kentucky, all the way up into northern New England. They're anticipating a pretty good winter storm here coming up. As much as 2 to 4 inches of snow could fall in northern Alabama around Huntsville. Well, for us, clearer skies across the interior as the weekend unfolds, but also some areas of increasing wind as the pressure gradient increases from north to south. We're also going to have a chance at some enhanced aurora activity this weekend, potentially tonight, but then possibility of a little stronger solar disturbance arriving here late in the weekend. And don't forget, we're going to lose an hour of sleep this weekend. Time change. We go to daylight saving time. So spring ahead 1 hour. Your cell phone takes care of that, but if you have any other clocks, such as at your oven, stove, microwave, or clock radio, if you still have one of those, you know what I mean. Then colder, drier air is going to overspread the mainland, especially through the weekend, and be centered over the southwest portion of the state next week. So we do see not as mild of a period, nor as wet and snowy type of weather that we've had here for the past actually several weeks. No watches, warnings, or advisories are currently in effect as of this recording during the mid-afternoon. Nowhere in the state, so we're getting a little bit of a break, though still some inclement weather lingers along the Gulf Coast, including areas of the Panhandle. They've picked up an inch or two of wet snow today across much of the Panhandle, as reported out of Juneau, and they're anticipating perhaps another inch or two of snow in areas of the Panhandle tonight into Saturday morning. Wouldn't be too heavy, but nevertheless still some lighter precipitation that's going to linger there from the Panhandle back along the Gulf, extending out into the Aleutians. But the overall trend is the interior, clearer, drier weather as we go through this weekend, but also temperatures are going to be falling. This afternoon, at least earlier, Unalakleet had clear skies, 26 degrees, so you'll be able to see the aurora there tonight. It's just going to be a bit chillier. And Yakutat, under cloudy skies there, as I said, are some lingering rain and snow showers along the Gulf Coast and areas of snow showers inland a bit. And keep in mind, if you are in a location with clear skies, enhanced auroras will be possible this weekend. Geomagnetic storm watch later Sunday, possibility of a Category 2 geomagnetic storm later on Sunday, March 13th. And full moon happens on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 11:18 in the evening. So we're at that point now where the moon continues to wax, get brighter. It's a waxing gibbous moon as we go through the weekend. Winds, strongest winds Saturday afternoon are going to be along the middle and lower, especially lower Yukon Valley, along areas of the Norton Sound, extending out there toward south of St. Lawrence. As the pressure gradient is a little stronger there, high pressure will be building from along the Arctic coast and North Slope into the Yukon territory, and as a result, that's going to push the colder air slowly southward. And by Sunday afternoon, still some pretty good winds over along the YK Delta, the southwest parts of the state from Norton Sound southward, down along the southwest coast, including Nunavik Island. And then also we see some increasing winds out across the Gulf. There's going to be a low pressure working its way upward along the Gulf that It's not really going to make it in there per se right away, but at least keep some precipitation, lighter precipitation, and some winds going there across a good chunk of the Gulf here later this weekend and early next week. Cloud patterns, not a whole lot to speak of in terms of clearer conditions across the interior, but still lingering cloud cover from the Panhandle westward along the Alaska Peninsula, extending out into the Aleutians, where you'll just see some on again, off again, either a mix of rain and snow showers, but again, they're all on the light side. And looking at temperatures, as well, first look at the weather maps here. Let's see, we have a little frontal boundary that's going to be stalling out there near and south of the Alaska Range before it gets down to the Gulf Coast. Just lingering troughiness along not just the outer Panhandle in British Columbia, but also westward along the Alaska Peninsula and just north of the Aleutians. And by tonight into early Saturday morning, we see that the wind gradient up there across the central interior through the middle Yukon Valley. And by Saturday afternoon, the front just kind of stalls out there along and just south of the Alaska Range. And any remaining low pressure is very weak from the northwest Gulf back into the Aleutians. And by Sunday, there will be a stronger low off to the south of the Gulf there along the Gulf North Pacific interface, and that's going to spread some more precipitation and breezier conditions up into the Gulf on Sunday. Meanwhile, that's only going to serve to enhance the wind gradient there along the Gulf Coast and also along portions of the southwest coast, as you can see. So keep that in mind, but at least much of the interior will enjoy sunnier conditions. Lows Saturday morning generally at or above freezing across much of the coastal areas. Inland a bit colder, 20s, even some teens. And then Saturday afternoon should be above freezing. Anchorage, Talkeetna 36. Lower mid-40s still possible. Outer southern Panhandle and Kodiak Island, King Salmon southwestward. Sunday morning a bit colder there as you get toward the northern end of the Copper River Basin, 6 above Glen Allen, 6 below over toward McGrath. But otherwise, temperatures still 20s to generally lower 30s, and afternoon highs maybe a few degrees starting to cool down there Sunday afternoon in the interior of the south central areas. Still, though, lower mid 40s, the south and western outer ends there of the Panhandle, and beginning to cool there down along the Alaska Peninsula too. But you'll see the colder air returning, 20s below, even a few spots near 30 below Saturday morning north slope. And we'll see temperatures remain below zero there along the north slope, pockets there within the interior around, say, Arctic Village, Eagle. And then as we go into Sunday morning, we'll see the colder air beginning to kind of backdoor in from the north and east, and that's going to tend to want to funnel south and westward as we go into early next week. Daytime high Sunday afternoon should generally be a bit below zero there. North slope, single digits to teens across much of the Yukon Valley, at least mid and upper Yukon Valley. And then Saturday morning lows near freezing along the Alaska Peninsula, extending a bit above freezing into the Aleutians. Still lower 40s possible, King Salmon, Kodiak southwestward, but cooling down into the teens and 20s there into the lower Yukon Valley. Sunday morning lows starting to get below zero again as you get up toward Galena, McGrath, and then Sunday afternoon highs will only be in the teens there in the southwest interior, though you should see some sunshine. But here's the temperature trend. March 17th through the 21st, 6 to 10 day outlook shows the coldest temperatures centered over southwest Alaska at that time. And we do expect precipitation to be averaging below normal across the middle and lower Yukon, as well as Kuskokwim River basins on the western portion of the state. We're a little bit above normal, perhaps there in through the Panhandle along the southeastern Alcan border.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, let's look at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned this weekend, Saturday and on Sunday, we still have a couple of weak areas of low pressure, one on the western Gulf Saturday morning and back out just north of the central Aleutians in the lower Bering. Weak systems, not much to them. We still have a little lingering lower cloudiness and some areas of light precipitation up along the Gulf Coast. Otherwise, high pressure that's going to be moving in through along the north slope and then sliding southeastward into northwest Canada. That's going to build a bit, not especially strong, but it's going to increase the pressure gradient across central parts of the state, especially along and just north and northwest of the Alaska Range. So that's going to lend toward turbulence. But we do see rather widespread IFR conditions along the Gulf Coast, the intercoastal areas there of the Panhandle Saturday morning. And as we go into Saturday afternoon, still areas of IFR there, Copper River Basin down along, say Yakutat on over toward the northern Panhandle, and then also north of the Aleutians there in the lower Bering and parts of Kodiak Island. Sunday morning, we notice that we're going to start to see as that high pressure builds southeastward, drier conditions, improving more VFR conditions across the mainland. Still, though, areas of IFR across the northern Panhandle. Sunday morning, a few pockets holding, especially south of the Alaska range there into the Copper River Basin and areas maybe just to the west there of Yakutat, and also along parts of the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. So that by Sunday afternoon, generally VFR conditions will be the rule across much of the mainland. Still areas of IFR, though, out over the Gulf and parts of the north central Gulf Coast. So Anaktuvuk as well as Adigan passes will see VFR conditions on Saturday as that high begins to build southeastward. Lake Clark and Merrill hanging on to some moisture in the morning will lead to IFR conditions early in the day, Saturday becoming MVFR with further improvement anticipated Saturday night into Sunday. Rainy Pass starts out IFR becoming MVFR, and as we round up through the central Alaska range, look for MVFR conditions becoming VFR. And that'll be the case further east at Isabel, becoming VFR Saturday afternoon. And Metasta is going to hold on to some of that moisture a little longer, especially from the south entrance southward into the Copper River Basin. IFR conditions will hold Saturday. And then looking at Tanita Pass, generally IFR conditions holding there, especially through the east entrance, but the west side and further west MVFR conditions. Same thing at Portage Pass. Look for IFR conditions there. The eastern half of the pass in through Prince William Sound, but MVFR conditions anticipated on the west side, the west entrance. And then Chilkoot and White will hold on to IFR conditions there in the northern Panhandle, at least on Saturday. And looking at freezing levels, the surface freezing line runs from along the Panhandle there in through the inner channels to along the northern Gulf Coast, and then back out across the Alaska Peninsula to north of the Aleutians there up across the lower portion of the Bering Sea. And then we're looking for icing potential, not much in the way of deep cloudiness, deeper moisture. So as a result, just some pockets of lighter icing possible there along the Gulf Coast, parts of the Panhandle, especially north of the central and eastern Aleutians in the lower Bering for Saturday. Generally between 3 to 10,000 feet is the general rule. And then looking at the upper level jet stream winds, strongest jet core is lower right, extending from the height of Hawaii on up into British Columbia into central Canada. Wind max from the southwest upwards to 120 knots. Across western parts of the state, north and western parts of the mainland, winds will be out of the northeast to east, 70 to 85 knots, circulate around that high over eastern Russia. As we drop down to 9,000 feet, we see that broader easterly flow across west central areas of the mainland, across Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula towards St. Lawrence Island. And then as we get down to 3,000 feet, this tells the real story. We can see the high pressure ridges extending from eastern Russia across the Arctic coast, and then that'll be building into the central Yukon as we go into through the weekend. As a result, that's going to increase easterly flow across the west central areas of the state, centered on Norton Sound, lower Yukon Valley, where winds will be 45 to 50 knots. As a result, that translates to the greatest threat for some moderate turbulence being anticipated along and north and northwest of the Alaska range, extending from the middle Yukon Valley back out over Norton Sound toward St. Lawrence Island. So we expect that turbulence to be between the surface and 3,000 feet around St. Lawrence Island, coming up a bit to surface to 4,000 feet as you head further westward up through the middle Yukon Valley. So if you do have a flight plan and are able to get out, have a safe flight.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called AKwx, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that AKwx is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AKwx is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades they're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So, how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies, maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So, tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So, then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So, it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So, let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 to 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations. And you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad. And this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch. And I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side. And I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding. And Rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRa's. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoras.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRa's. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, we conclude today's show as we usually do with the sea ice edge and looking there across the Arctic coast down in through the lower Chukchi Sea. There's plenty of cold air still in place, so it'll allow the ice to maintain. Winds won't be especially strong, so we don't expect any planias to really be opening up more than what they already have. But as we go further south, along the west coast and especially down along areas of the Kuskokwim and Yukon deltas, we are going to see the ice wanting to push further south and westward. We're going to see a maintenance of winds off the mainland out of the northeast. So that will continue here at least through the course of the weekend. And we certainly have developed up some areas where the ice is opened more so. But we are going to see a return of some colder air over the southwest here in the week ahead. So that's going to slow any of the ice breakup, and certainly we'll keep an eye on maybe a little more, at least allowing the ice to maintain a little while longer. But looking at the panhandle, winds will generally be out of the south about 15 knots in the inner channels, variable south end toward Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Generally onshore flow there, Sitka, Gustavus, more variable around Craig, and waves across the Gulf there generally around 8-9 feet. And during the day on Sunday, we will see winds turning more to the northwest there up across the inner channels, especially coming out of White's Pass down there at the length of Lynn Canal. Could be some gusts to 45 knots, getting some colder outflow winds as there's going to be high pressure building in to northwest Canada. And we expect winds to be out of the southeast to east, 25 to 30 knots along the outer Gulf Coast, and waves 10 to 11 feet. Across the northwest Gulf Coast, winds on Saturday will generally be from the south-southwest in the open waters, around 15 knots, waves 8 feet or so. But notice northeasterly winds there, Prince William Sound, 10 knots, waves a couple of feet, and northeast to east winds 10 to as high as 20 knots going down the length of Cook Inlet. And we will see those winds increase a bit on Sunday as we see the pressure gradient increase across the northern Gulf Coast. There's going to be a low down along the kind of the Gulf North Pacific interface. It's going to turn these winds more around toward the north-northeast and be as high as 30 knots off the Kenai with waves 11-12 feet. And we could see some channeling winds there at the entrance of Cook Inlet from the northeast to 35 knots and waves 10 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Saturday, winds will generally be out of the east on the north then, still from the south-southwest 20 knots on the Pacific side, turning more northeasterly around Bristol Bay to 20 knots, and by Sunday that'll be very evident. Winds will generally be out of the northeast across the region, and definitely some channeling there through Shelikof Strait, 35-knot winds, waves maybe 11 feet, with higher waves as you get out there into the North Pacific, Western Gulf as high as 12 to 15 feet. And winds across Bristol Bay down toward north of Cold Bay there, 20 to 25 knots out of the northeast. The Aleutian chain will be relatively quiet, winds generally under 20 knots on Saturday, so rather benign conditions by the Aleutian standards. And even into Sunday there, central eastern Aleutians, variable winds 10-15 knots, waves 5 to 8 feet. Along the west coast, the YK deltas on up into Norton Sound, winds will be out of the northeast 25 to 30 knots, so that's going to cause the ice to want to push south and westward a bit. Maybe not quite as strong as what we've seen here in the past week, but enough to keep that ice movement happening. And on Sunday, we're looking at generally 25-knot winds out of the northeast across the region, so a continuation and the invasion of some colder air. We're going to get colder air press south and westward in the week ahead as some colder air returns to the mainland. And across the Arctic coast, winds will be somewhat variable there as well, 10 to 15 knots, generally offshore flow as you get from Utqiagvik down to Cape Lisburne and Point Hope to the Bering Strait, picking up to 30 knots off the Kenai Peninsula north of St. Lawrence. And then on Sunday, winds will generally be out of the southwest, 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast, more west to northwest, lower Chukchi Sea around 10 knots, and still northeasterly to 25 knots south of Wales and Port Clarence, especially on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And looking at the weather map, early Saturday morning, we have weak low pressure along the Aleutian chain, some troughiness that lingers up into the northern Gulf. And that frontal boundary along the south of the Alaska Range just kind of stalls out. Pressure gradient will be increasing winds from the Elcan border along to the west coast, including Norton Sound on Saturday. And then generally the low pressure stays south of the Gulf on Sunday, and we expect breezier conditions Gulf-wide.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.